Hello and welcome to episode 35 of building a 2D multiplayer game in Flutter. The last few episodes we talked mostly about how to properly send data back and forth, how to properly sync the clients with the server, and so on. We talked about authority servers. Um, I actually added all the nodes that we created to a devlog. So here, for instance, is a document that talks about all these terms that we mentioned and has all the resources in the bottom. So if you want to follow that, I'm going to put the link to the devlog into the chat. And also we talked about how are we going to apply this to our game. So we basically decided that we're going to have an authoritative server that basically sends updates every 100 milliseconds to the client. In the meantime, the client will basically use prediction to basically move the opponents and move the player that we basically are. Then the other thing is that the client itself will update its own updates that it sends to the server to 10 per second, which also means like every 100 milliseconds roughly, right? And then basically everything else is predicted, as I mentioned. And then we use something called dead reckoning, and that's mentioned below here in this document, to kind of correct the client assumptions to whatever the server dictates us to be the case, right? Now, how are we limiting this player inputs to like 10 per second? Well, instead of sending keystrokes, what we'll do, we'll basically send, a shot was created, or player applied thrust, and we send the rotation. So obviously then we have to say we can only shoot once every 100 milliseconds, and the same applies to the thrust, and that we can say that's kind of a feature of the game. And then the rotation, basically we can rotate as much as we want within those 100 milliseconds, but instead of sending the keystroke for the rotation or maybe the gesture, we're just updating the server to the rotation that we ended up with. And so that's pretty much what we talked about. Now, in the meantime, I did stream yesterday, but I didn't make it an episode because it was mostly cleaning up things. So as you can see, this is where the episode 34 ended. And actually, we might be in a different episode than just 34 because we don't have to actually count. We might actually be in episode 37 instead of 35. I'll fix those tags, but right now basically this is our episode now. We start here, but these commits that happened in the meantime, they were basically cleanup. And I'm gonna just show real quick what we did. So we separated our code cleanly into client, server, and shared. Right. So the client is basically the UI code, the game engine that only runs on the client. Then RPC calls that we're making to the server, some widgets, and then the game itself, entities, and so on, the keyboard inputs, some sprites, all these things that are not running on the server. And then the server code is basically the game loop that runs on the server, the game state, and so on. And the server itself, obviously, in the service. And then shared code has all these things that are used by the client and the server. For instance, the controllers are used on the server basically to update the world to what it should be, and the client basically uses the same controllers to predict how it could be or how it probably will be. And then we have the generated code here, which is generated from our proto. And the protos are outside here still because they're not really part of the code. They're kind of just helping to generate the code in a way. And then the models, obviously, since we are sending them and we're using them on client and server, they're shared. So we cleaned all that up. Another cool thing that we found out is, while I was playing around, that actually what we can do, we can actually send metadata. So metadata, or we have them as call options here. But basically what we can do is, so if you look at the proto, the way that was done, we used to have more methods here, right? Because we said, okay, I want to request to play, and then we had another method that said, I want to sync the game state of the server, but I'm going to give you actually the playing client as an input. I couldn't give a stream as an input because we needed to immediately know the game ID and client ID. But what I found out is actually we can send this as part of the metadata of the call. So we can basically now, instead of having this extra method, we only have one, and basically so we have a request to play method. So we make a play request and we say we want to play, and that's that method over here. And then we can say sync a client and game state, which is this one, and we immediately give it the input stream, which is basically the inputs. And we thought at first they would be keys and gestures, but they're not. And then the server immediately gives us back its stream of game updates. So we have one method for that. And then basically we send along these call options, which tells the server which client we're basically dealing with and which game that client is in. So if you look at the service now, we can say, okay, well, we are basically able now to pull out the game ID and client ID here. And then we know which subscription to give to the client. So here you have the game states, right? And the game state comes from the game. So we know which game the client needs to actually be updated about. And then here we create the subscription. And the cool thing is now, since we know the game ID and client ID, we can handle at least give more information on client disconnects, right? Now, something I've here is a to-do. If a game finishes, we obviously know to clean up. If like maybe everyone but one player, lost all their health. However, if clients disconnect, we still have to figure out when do we actually decide to kind of like kill the game, right? When do we actually stop showing? Basically, otherwise we're leaking games on the server, right? We're keeping games alive. So that's something I have to do about. We don't worry about this now. And then basically, so basically we're in a good place. The code is cleaned up, at least to a certain extent now, much better than before. We still have these weird warnings here, which I hate. So I'm going to take a quick stab at, they're only at dot geometry. So I'm going to take a quick stab at fixing that. It probably is because it needs to be, where is the dot geometry now? Lib shared engine. So maybe it is just because, all right, let's see. If we refresh this now, it could be fixed. We'll see, we'll find out. But basically, okay, this looks better. And the thing is though that I feel sometimes this is inconsistent, but let's just hope that it stays that way. So, so basically this is about, it's a short basically, fixing ignored files in analysis. Okay, so now we can move on to the game. What I want to do at first is I want to start, so let's just show what we have now. So we can start the server, and then we'll just start 2 clients. And I did update Flutter, so it might actually take a while. Okay, I need to select Mac. Okay, so we see now that it's starting to download things. But what I want to do is basically, I want to go ahead into the server, and inside the, well, a few things we need to do. But basically in the game loop, instead of doing what we're doing here, just like changing the angle, just to prove to ourselves that actually we're getting events about what changed, I want to go ahead and use the controllers here. The thing is though, right now, the game as it is, so let's just, okay, so we got 1 waiting for players. Okay, so this is where we were, and now we have another one. And now basically what we'll get is we get 2 of those, and they're both basically having these players that are rotating. Okay, and we'll see that in a second. But basically what I want to do is I want to, okay, so now we can see that, right? So we got 1, and we got another one here. And they're basically both in sync rotating the players, right? Okay, so that's kind of cool. What I want to do though is I want to start actually using real controllers. Now one problem we have is this. that in the player controller, we are basically processing keys. See that here? And basically we don't want to do that anymore. We want to basically update the player angle and when we have left and right, and then we want to, so let's see, and then we want to basically set applied thrust, and basically this one here is the one that we send to the server. We don't send the velocity to the server, right? Because that would allow the client to maybe change the velocity in a certain way. We don't want that. And then we also have another one where we basically fire a shot somewhere, right? So all this code that has to do with keys, right? We basically want to remove these things from the update. And what we need to do then is we need to create inside the client, we need to actually create a kind of like, here we have the inputs. So we could actually put this here, right? I mean, right now we can put it here, process inputs or something, right? So let's create a dot file here, and let's call it input processor. And the input processor will actually have access to numerous things because it will update numerous models, right? So let's say the input processor, and basically we'll copy the update function from here. Okay, update. We did a really bad job at copying and pasting. So what we don't need, we need the WT, we need this, we don't need the stats model, I don't think. But we need our player, right? We need the player who we are. So actually we can probably figure that out, right? We don't need all the other players because the inputs will only affect our own player, right? So we can go ahead and import these things. Okay, and then, all right. So now what we'll do, we'll basically pull this in. So this is all about this is all about the key here. So increase angle, right? First of all, it needs to be renamed. But where's this increase angle thing? So we misspelled it. So let's just fix that first. And let's see where this is defined. So this is defined here. And this is a really small function. You can just put it here. We named it over there, but we didn't rename it over here. Okay, so now we got this function over here. Obviously now here, this needs to disappear. Thrust. So let's just think about that. What we need to do, we need to actually set the player that the player applied thrust. And in here, actually, all this other stuff, we need to do if the player applied thrust. So let's just first of all copy this over here. But instead of setting all this, we just say player applied thrust is true. Right? Basically, we're separating the key processing from everything else. So now we can say the player applied thrust is true. And now here, instead of saying did we have a key up, we're just going to say if player dot applied thrust, then we set this. Sorry, exactly the opposite, right? We want to set this. All right. So now we got what this. Now if so, this is the same thing. This is gestures, right? Now we're going to copy this over here. So if the player applied, so we're going to say the player did apply thrust. And then basically we have the same thing, except we need to figure out what the thrust force is. So now we have a problem, right? So actually what we want to send then to the server is we need to send a thrust force. See that? So basically we have two different thrust forces here. So if I just remove this, and I basically would want this to be in one place, right? Kind of like this. But the stupid thing is that now we have two different, we have to know what's a gesture or not. So actually what we want to do is, we want to actually set the applied thrust force to something. So what we actually want to do is, applied thrust force, we're going to get rid of this boolean altogether. Instead it's going to be it's applied thrust force, and it's going to be a double, most likely. And let's see where else we have this. Okay, so normally it will just be 0, right? So yeah, when we pack this, now we have to think about, right? We need to fix this. So the server model now cannot just say applied thrust or something like that. It actually needs to say. It actually needs to say like what the amount of thrust we applied, right? Applied thrust force. So now we can say that the player increased velocity. And then we basically set the thrust force to this. And now let's go back here to the where we were, to our input processor. So now what we're gonna say is when the key was up, then we say the applied thrust force is this, right? And we need to get the keyboard thrust force. So we got that in a second. And so now we can see here, it's just basically whatever the applied thrust force is, right? And then the gestures, if we have gestures, we just basically set the thrust force to this, right? And we send that to the thrust force. Okay. And now basically here we have the same except code. Right? And now we basically in our so then basically here what we do, we set that back to 0 instead of saying it's basically false, right? So now basically what we have, the other thing though is that once we update this, we don't necessarily always want to set this to 0, but we'll get there soon. But basically we're going to put it to do here. Well, we'll figure this out. Basically, we need to pull out of the player. We basically need to pull out a kind of an input package, like what kind of inputs were changed, right? So we'll see about that, because we can't just set it back to 0 before we inform the server that actually there was thrust force applied. But let's go step by step. So the keyboard thrust force, let's see if we even need this anymore. We don't. Okay, so basically what we're just going to pull this over here where we actually need it. And we'll create a constructor, and we just say, okay, so now we're initializing this here. Okay, so here we have a keyboard rotation factor, probably the same story, right? We probably don't need this here anymore. And so let's just take this from here. and do it like this. And we probably need pi, maybe 2 pi, yeah. So that one probably we don't need here either anymore. Okay, so we just basically moved part of the controller code. We'll probably put that up here, over here, right? And I'm not sure. Yeah, basically we want this to be on the player, right? But then we basically need to basically what we need to do is we need to say if we pull out the inputs, right? If we say if you want to pull out the inputs that we want to give to the server, what we'll do is, like, if they ever apply thrust, we never set it to 0, even though maybe the player model now doesn't show this anymore. We need to keep this because we need to basically, once we send our inputs to the server, we need to basically still have that value there. We can't lose that. So, okay, update sprites. If player starts 4s, what we actually, yeah, I don't want to put too many things on there. So it's pretty simple, right? If it's not 0, here we need the pi. Let's see. Here we got a plus not defined. So this one we need to actually create these input processors. So maybe inside the game actually we need to do that. So here we need to actually create an input processor. Or actually the game controller, so the game controller can't have that. Because the game controller, ideally we use it also on the server. So that'd be nice if you actually end up using this whole thing without having to actually control the players and bullets separately. So for now we'll put it, well then that means we can put it here, but we can't put it on the game controller. So inputs, what do we call it? Inputs processor, right? Put processor. And then here we'll assign it. Hold on, why is there a background? Oh yeah, that's fine. The background is UI stuff, right? We're fine with the UI stuff here. So now let's say the input processor is a input processor. And we put this here, and then whatever else it needs. I think nothing else. But it is complaining because we're missing a comma here. Okay, so we got the input processor, and basically now when we update, we run the input processor first. Okay, this is starting to look like it makes sense, right? Dot update, we pass dt, and we put the things we might want to put a timestamp on the inputs, but we'll see about that. What else does it want? It wants press keys and the gestures, I think, in that order. But also it wants a game model, I think. Hold on, input processor update. It needs the T game keys, gestures, and it needs the player. So we need to figure out which player we are. Do we know who we are? I think we do. Do we not know who we are? Who knows who we are? It's a good question. So let's just look at this real quick. When we run our game, by the way, which we now rename to Batufo instead of main, run our game, we get the client, or the client knows our ID. That's true. The game model, we're creating that with the client ID, right? However, we are not giving it. So what are we using the client ID for? Nothing. But we should probably store that somewhere, right? So this game model is not used on the server. So now we can easily see that, well, it's shared. So the client ID will never change, right? Doing the game. So we could probably store it with the game itself. So when we create the game, actually, that's where we pass in the ID. So here we have the game, the client game, right? Which is what we were looking at. And we named this, as you can see, we named this nicely. We have the server game, we have the client game, so we don't get confused anymore. So the client game, where are we creating that? We're creating it. I wonder. Here. Okay, so we only created the first time we're being built, and so we want the client ID. So you want to create this with the right. So this guy will now take a client ID, which will be a final int, and it will be passed here. Okay, so now we just need to get this from somewhere. And basically we need to pass this when we create this guy here, maybe. All right, and now basically this int. And now basically when we create this, we just say what our client ID is. Okay, cool. So now we basically made this available to us. So so we can now say widget.clientID. It's kind of weird. We might change this later, but for now we just wanted to get this information to where we needed it. So this is this .clientID. Actually, we can make this private. Okay, now we have this here. Now we can pass this to our friend, the input processor. No, actually, we use it here, and it's basically of the client ID. And we can assert that the player is not null. Or we say our player should exist. A player with ID, client ID should exist, not exit. And then now we can basically pass in the player. Oh, what is this? A player? That doesn't give us a player model though. So we need the player models. Hold on, I hope I'm doing this correctly here. So that's what we actually want, the player model. Those are the models already. So we already have them available to us. It's on the game. So this would be That's what we actually want. Okay, so now we should be happy. So now we can say update the input processor and get the input out. So now we basically removed. So the main thing why we did all this is I want to actually jump back to the. Yeah, let's forget about this one for now. Okay, I wanted to clean out I wanted to clean out the player controller. So now the player controller has really nothing about keys, nothing. It's only shared stuff. See that? We can actually move this. And so now the player controller is basically totally working on the server. So what we can actually do is we can now, so now let's look at the game controller, right? So we're still kind of in the process of separating out the controllers like cleanly, right? Before we were thinking we would be sending keystrokes, but we are not. So we now basically made that work. So we got the player controllers. And then when we update, we just update the player controllers for now. So right now, actually, this should work already. What we're going to do is we're going to give our players a velocity on the server when we create it. And we're going to see if they move or not. So let's go to our game loop. Wherever it says... so the current game state. So right now we have a game state here. And our game controller works with, it just does this thing. And it takes a game, right? So the game is a game model, which has a bunch of stuff on it. So we might have a little bit duplicate code. We'll do this for now. This is really simple. This is really simple. So you might be, what we do for now is we'll we go in the game loop and like we basically iterate through all our players. And so the players here, we just basically update them. So those are player models. So, and let's look at a player controller again over here. Well, we misspelled this. So here we can basically create a controller. For now, we're going to create a controller each time. So this needs to go away. So we're going to get some errors there. And then also the stats need to go away for, well, we're going to remove this for now because the thing is that the stats will most likely be attached to the player. There's no other way around it. Let's just move this all together. So we can clearly see that we set thrust force to 0 and then we apply it again maybe. If well, it doesn't make sense, does it? Needs to happen like this, right? Because we first need to check if it applied thrust first, and then update, and then we just say it didn't, right? Okay. So then this is the stat stuff that we won't do for now. So let's clean that up. And actually, once we're done with this part, we're actually going to check this in and say that we moved things out. So now, if we update the and actually we were going to run the game and see if it still works also. So now we don't need this anymore. Okay, and now the thing is obviously, why do we have the press keys here? So actually what we need to do then is, this is a game controller, right? So basically the game controller shouldn't do anything with the keys anymore. Yeah, I almost don't like why this has to be a game model. If it wouldn't have to be a model, if it could be like a game state. So let's just look at what the game state looks like. There's a bunch of players. And we will have bullets on there. I mean, the only thing we won't have is the floor tiles and floors. So it's almost like the game model could be inheriting from the game state. And then basically what we could take here in the game controller is a game state. So that way we can kind of reuse the same code. But for now we'll keep it separate. But now what I'm going to do at the very moment is to just relaunch our server and our clients to see if this still works as is, right? Nothing should have broke. Well, did we actually in our game? We need to make sure that doing the update, yeah, we update our input stuff, right? And that's important. So, and then we actually need to, well, actually, if we do this, we then should actually be back to normal. Then our game should basically work client side already again. And this should also work. And now we're getting less and less warnings here, so that's good. Let's make that a getter. So, and then where we follow, we have the same thing. Okay. So we get much less warnings now. So now actually, so server can keep running. Now actually if I run this game, we should actually start to be able to control things. again. And I would call that a good development if that's the case. And then we also want to run the other one. It's too bad we can't just do that here. Okay, so let's see. So we have one which is waiting for players, which we are expecting. And then in each one, we should be able to control the player if we did everything right. And basically, like, all right, so let's see, we got big error here. So when we increase velocity, it looks like we're sending null. Oh, null, okay, yeah. So let's see. Why would the velocity ever be null? Because some of the players weren't initialized on the game correctly. So let's think about this. So what I want to do actually, when I create a player, I want to make sure that it's at least that the velocity can never be null. So the player model, velocity should never be null. And the same for the type position. We don't know what to do in that case, right? What? What's the complaining about? Oh, to unpack. Okay, so yeah, that not here. We need to do this when we unpack. Here. Right, so here we kind of, and actually we should probably do that not here, but we should. Should probably do that here. Are we allowed to do that? Okay, so that seems to work. So now we basically make sure that our velocity can never be. Okay, so if we refresh this, somehow we joined with two players now, right? So basically we got this error. This one is still waiting for because it basically crashed. But this one we should be able to control, but we can't for some reason. But that's probably fine. So let's just see why. Why can't we control it? So in our game here, right? Basically, in our client game, when we hit the update, we update the inputs. So that means it would update the client player, right? Would update our player directly, right? Because we can see that it basically sets the angle and all these things. And then we basically go and update the game controller. But the weird thing is, the game controller basically has a reference to all the player controllers, which basically in a player controller in weird ways, well, it doesn't even have access to the players. There's a client ID. Oh, and it has basically telling you to update the players. Why does it need the client ID? To get its own player. So each player controller is kind of responsible for one player, it seems like. That's how we did it. But in a way, it just needs to update all the players anyways, right? I'm wondering if we really need a separate controller for all of them. But now we have a controller per player. Okay, we'll leave it like this, but we might not even need it. We might just have a player's controller. And we might actually implement that just to put it around it. But for now we have that. So we init our player controllers. And then we update them, right? And that's the game controller. So that happens here. And in the meantime, though, we did already update our own client player keys, right? So we don't update the other players' keys because we don't know what they did. So it should have actually done this. So let's, I mean, we'll figure this out later. What I want to do is I want to actually just make sure that we didn't break anything that was working before, which was basically we can launch things and we can receive updates from the server. So let's go to our game loop, I guess. Right, and we update the angle still, right? So we want to make sure that that still works. So if we go now and launch one of those players and then another one in a second. Right, and let's launch this one as well now. So this one should come up. All right, so we're waiting for players. Now the other guy should come up. Definitely need to find a faster way to restart the game and sync things. Once we got things figured out a little bit. Okay, cool. We're still getting this. The method double. Increase velocity. How can it ever be double? Let's look at the player model, how we unpack it. Create a player model, right? We pass in velocity and all these things. But we're saying here that our velocity unless this is like, I mean, let's see. This is that. And this is that. It figures that out. Okay. And so we're saying that it's the velocity, but if it's null, set it to 0. Right? So then I don't understand how it would ever be So you came from here. Okay, fine. And then game not players. Hold on, just stop. Just stop. Okay. What if the players knew? Well, how did? I don't understand how they could be. Let's fix it for now. All right. Let's. I just want to see if this works at all. So the server should still be running fine because now we're going to start a new game. Server should be happy. So we disconnected these clients from the same game, right? They had different client IDs, but they were in the same game. And then basically they should just get a new game once you reconnect. So let's try that. I just want to get to the point where we can check this in and say we separated out the key stuff and cleaned some things up. That's the main thing I want to do. So we have the waiting for players for this guy. And then this guy will come up as well. I'm still not sure how the velocity would ever be 0. I hope the double will not be null either now. Okay, let's see what we get here. Now it's this guy. You see the force. Okay. Applied thrust force. Oh, that is by default. Okay, so maybe that's what the problem actually was. Then maybe we don't even need our hack here, because maybe we just read it wrong to where basically we need to say that the applied thrust force can also never be null, right? Right, because when we actually create the mod, I think that's what the bug is actually. On the server, we are applying it in a way, right? But here we didn't do it. So the applied thrust force should, when we unpack it, well, we'll unpack it on the server. So we actually need to, right? We need to actually set this. Okay, but now we basically got our things fixed, and this is not a bad thing to do. Like, we might cover up some bugs that we actually may not want to cover up, but for now we're good, I think. All right, so let's go back here and let's relaunch our 1 and 2, and I'm just going to launch them together. I'm going to see if that actually works to speed things up a little bit. So as you can see, the workflow that we have right now is not ideal, right? We basically are waiting for the longest time before things come back up, and we need to basically fix that too. We need to have some button to say start new game or something like that, and so we can just reload. That's like the strength of Flutter. We're kind of losing that at the moment. So we get this. And now the other one should come up. Oh, see, that's the thing. Like, we can't even launch them at the same time because then while one is building, the other one. Well, I don't understand why it has to build every time, right? Nothing changed. It already built. Maybe if you launch it from the terminal, it won't build. Maybe that's because we have a configuration here. It says build. Okay, so we got the thing spinning. So let me just see if I can control it now. Nothing happens. Okay, so that's not working yet. Definitely not working yet. So the inputs are not working, but we separate them out. We got the same results. Nothing is broken, and I think that's where we'll stop for this episode. I'm just going to check that in. So actually what we're going to do is let's just look at everything we did here. So hold on a second. So basically basically this was just passing on the client ID, right? And then the client here basically we added the input processor. We made sure we can get our own player, and then we update our own player with the inputs. In the game controller, basically we made sure that we removed everything that's related to keys, right? Because that's not part of the controller anymore. Same here for the player controller. Here we basically did something with the thrust force, because we want it to be. We need to basically send the server the thrust force. And right, so basically here we just basically changed it all about the thrust force thing, and here we removed the entire most of this code from the controller because we moved it into this one here, the input processor, right? Moved all that in here. Player model was slightly updated because we want to make sure that it can never be null. And then the server game, we just had applied thrust force here. So yeah, you can say that most of the stuff, pretty much all the stuff we did was move out the input control from the controller, right? So moving input processing into separate class. That way the player physics, right? So the thing is that the server then can do the same, and basically the server will send the server whatever the input controller, input processor basically comes up with. We'll pull that back out of the player every time we complete our loop, and then at 100 milliseconds. Basically, whenever 100 milliseconds are passed, then we will send that update to the server. So the server can then say, okay, what happened in the meantime? But it doesn't have to deal with specific keys. Instead of just deals with like, okay, the angle changed. Did the player apply thrust and how much? And did the player? We don't have. We're missing the space, and I think that's part of bullets. So we need to actually pull that out once we add bullets back in. So as you can see, this is a little bit slow going here, but we'll get there. We just basically had a single player game, and we're slowly but surely making it really multiplayer able. So make sure to join me for the next episode where we'll basically, I promise you by the end of the next episode, we will have a player that's controlled on the server where we maybe like we set a velocity right from the get-go. We'll have it moving on the client. Like we basically have the physics calculated on the server and we'll be moving. I don't know if we get actually the input sent to the server, but we'll do our best. So make sure to watch the next episode as well. And thank you for watching. And for all the Twitch watchers, I will not stream another hour today. Today's Sunday, so I'm taking it easy. But I will be back tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern as always, and I will stream 2 hours tomorrow. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.